Look at the headlines. All right, let's look at this Pew Research Center study, Millennials and Political News, conducted between March 19th and April 29th of 2014. So a year old on the data, but they've been going through and mining it. They've released some of the data from the same study under a political preferences study previously, but this time they're looking at it by generation. So what are the generations? They define millennial as someone born between 1981 and 1996.
No.
That makes you a millennial, Veronica?
Oh, barely.
Yeah. You skate in as one of the older millennials, the responsible millennials. And they define a baby boomer as someone born between 1946 and 1964, which leaves me as undefined.
You're just a guy.
I'm just this guy, you know. Actually, no, they bundle in Gen Y and Gen X as Gen X. So all you Gen Yers, you don't even get your own. You had to share it with us old Gen Xers.
Well, this is crazy because I was originally in the Gen Y category.
Right.
And then they
split you up.
created millennials, and we got bundled under the millennial banner. And which, you know, I feel bad saying this, but I mean, millennials get such a terrible rap these days. And
Gen
like,
Xers
so it's kind of like, whoa.
Gen
so
Xers,
we try to do a little distancing, but
we had our day. Back in the Gen Xers were the folks that everyone called slackers and all that stuff. So
it's true, but the data is very interesting because it's, you know, we use the term interesting a lot because it's an easy go-to word, but this is actually really interesting. I swear to God, millennials are really getting a lot of their political information and news from Facebook, around 61%, and in fact they don't really pay attention to a lot of different news sources like television, for example. But the thing that I worry about overall is that millennials are getting, or let's just say people who are paying attention to Facebook more than other news sources for their political information. Isn't that information already coming to them kind of biased? Because they're getting curated content based on their location, based on who they're friends with, based on what stories they've liked in the past. So I feel like it's just perpetuating existing viewpoints instead of giving you a wider reaching view of politics at large.
Well, right. That's the worry, right? If 61% of millennials said that they get news about politics and government in the last week during the survey from Facebook. Baby boomers, only 39% said they had done that. 60% of the baby boomers said they got local TV.
Yeah, it's almost an exact flip-flop.
Yeah, exactly.
Millennials, 61% Facebook, 37% local TV. Baby boomers, 39% Facebook, 60% local TV. And then Gen X, 50-50.
We're just 50-50. We give everybody a chance. Here's an interesting point. News sources, millennials don't realize they're using Facebook in this manner, because the way they did the survey is they asked them first, what's your main source of political news? 21% of millennials said CNN. Now you say, oh, that's a low percentage, but that was the highest number for any particular source. They said CNN, NBC News, Fox News, a couple of newspaper sites, BuzzFeed, places like that. Then when they said, did you get any political news from this site? And then they would prompt them and ask them about it. That's when Facebook got the 61%. So once they were reminded about Facebook, they went, oh yeah, I did get some political news from Facebook. So they don't even realize that they're getting it, which could make your point about bias even worse. But here's the thing. At least half of the posts they see are related to government and politics, but they say they see other people's views. In fact, millennials more than anybody else said they saw opposing views or different views than their own over boomers and Gen X. The boomers are all seeing people that agree with them. So it's more of a problem for the boomers who aren't using Facebook as much than it is for the millennials.
Well, that's true, because if you're going to other sources to look for news, you're probably already going to biased content. You're probably going to, you know, whether it's MSNBC if you're more on the liberal side, or if it's Fox News if you're more on the conservative side. I'm making generalizations here, but I think boomers and people of the older Gen Y generations, you know, we know which news sources we already like, and so we're going there, getting the news we expect to see. But if you're on Facebook, and maybe if you have a more diverse diverse group of friends or family, then you're getting news stories that you may not necessarily agree with kind of shoved into your feed, and then you can be like, oh, my family, oh, they're the worst, oh, unfollow, get them out of here, oh, I can't stand it, why, how did I come from that nest? Oh. So,
I think you're right. I think the more often you use Facebook, the more likely you are to start to see or friend people with opposing viewpoints or differing viewpoints. Even boomers, they said, do posts on Facebook mostly reflect your own views? Only 31% of boomers said they did. So even baby boomers are seeing more diverse viewpoints. For Gen X, it was 21%, and for millennials, 18%. So both of them are saying, no, most of the views don't reflect exactly what I'm saying. Again, this is self-reported, though. I'd be curious if you could do some kind of content analysis of people's news feeds and say, okay, this does or does not match the viewpoints of the viewer, or whether they would like to think they're seeing more diverse views than they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to see also the, oh God, I'm hearing myself use that crutch word over and over. It's driving me crazy. And now I'm just making the viewers more aware of it too by bringing it up. But the
Millennials
shows
are more often likely to do that, I've known.
Is that a thing? Is that a thing we do? The trusted versus mistrusted news sources are pretty funny. Distrusted more than trusted by all three generations include the Glenn Beck program, the Rush Limbaugh show, the Sean Hannity show, and BuzzFeed.
Right. I think that's significant, right? And let's just say right now, if you're a fan of Glenn Beck, Rush Limbaugh, or Sean Hannity, this is just what you would expect. Younger generations generally prefer more liberal viewpoints, and older generations prefer more conservative viewpoints. So it's no surprise that conservative shows would be less popular with the younger set. However, BuzzFeed is the big outlier there, right? And your fear could be like, yeah, those young kids, they just want listicles, and that's all they read, and they believe everything they read on BuzzFeed. Apparently not.
Mm-hmm. But however, Daily Show, Colbert Report, Al Jazeera were trusted by millennials, but not by Generation X or baby boomers.
Al Jazeera, yeah. So that is really interesting that more Generation Xers and baby boomers distrust Colbert and Daily Show. Baby boomers because they probably, again, tend to be more conservative because they're older, whereas the Generation Xers, they just don't trust anybody. That's kind of what I've come to agree. However, 14 of the 36 sources that were listed on Pew were trusted by all three generations. So across the gamut, for the most part, they are trusting traditional news sources in all three cases. If you're wondering about Twitter, 14% of the millennials said they got news from Twitter, 9% of Gen Xers, and 5% of baby boomers. And news sources that millennials were more aware of than baby boomers or Gen Xers were BuzzFeed, even though they don't trust them, and Google News. Google News was barely mentioned by the baby boomers at all.
Mm-hmm. I was really curious to see what the 14 trusted across the board news sources were, and I'm having a hard time finding that in the article.
It's Appendix B, I believe. I can't remember what page it's on, but yeah, that would be interesting. While you're finding that, while you're digging that back out, let me say that this reminded me of when I proposed my master's thesis back in 1993, before the last of the millennials was born. I wanted to do a paper on people getting their news from non-news sources. And I posited that younger people got their news from non-news sources more often than others. When I said non-news sources, I meant things like The Simpsons, Late Night with David Letterman. I think it was still late night then, but it was before Late Show, and Saturday Night Live. And I think it makes me happy that we're still seeing that kind of study being done. Of course, in the modern day, it's not about non-news shows. You've got a lot more diverse sources for things. Did you find it?
I found the sources, but I'm having a hard time finding the 14 trusted across the board sources.
Well, it's at the top of the trust and distrust of news source among millennials, and the top were The Economist, NPR, Politico, BBC, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, CNN, New York Times, ABC, CBS, NBC, Google News, PBS, Washington Post, MSNBC, The New Yorker, Al Jazeera, Colbert Report, Daily Show, and Huffington Post.
Yeah.
So that's the millennials. They trust more than distrust the Huffington Post.
I think I agree with that.
And then they about equally trust and distrust things like The Blaze, Fox News, Drudge Report, Guardian, Slate, etc.
I was more confused by how few trusted Twitter, because I would imagine that you would follow sources that you trusted. So why would you not believe those sources about the news they were delivering to you?
Yeah, that is.
It's not like you're just given news sources to follow unless you're looking at things that other people are retweeting or sharing.
All right, so let's back up to your original point, which I think is actually the pertinent one here. If Facebook is the trend, right? Let's, the baby boomers, the Gen Xers, we're all old. Now, get us out of the way. The millennials are the future. If Facebook is the trend, does that give Facebook too much power over shaping the news?
I think Facebook knows it.
Yeah, they certainly do. They want to appear to be responsible with it. But that algorithm that makes your newsfeed, nobody can explain it. Nobody can really tell you how it works. There's some secrets at work there, and I don't want to put on my tinfoil hat necessarily, but a tweak of that algorithm could change the fortunes of a political candidate, you would think.
Oh, yes. And I mean, there's a lot of very cool articles about that topic specifically that we should dive into once the elections really start rolling around.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Because, yeah, we could do a whole episode on that kind of thing, like how social media affects political interest and change, and can you really change someone's mind through posts on Facebook? Can you kind of curate content in a way that makes them change their mind about certain political issues? I would love to know that. But I think that research is being worked on very heavily, especially within Facebook. There was a very interesting Radiolab episode, I believe, about relationships and how news articles in your feed affect your relationships, and yeah, so there's a lot to be learned from the data that they're gathering.
I like that idea.